Let's talk book, baby. Hey pals, Alicia here. I hope you are doing well. And if you're new here, this is the place where we talk about books. Today I am here to do a book tag. I am doing the IndigAThon Book Tag, which is part of the month-long IndigAThon read-a-thon. IndigAThon is a month-long read-a-thon in the month of November that is hosted by Brody at Brody and Michelle at Thor Wants Another Letter. I will link their channels and their information below. And to accompany the read-a-thon and all of the wonderful prompts, reading prompts that they have made for it, they have also created a 6-question book tag to highlight Indigenous literature and Indigenous fiction. So I'm gonna go through those 6 questions and recommend some amazing books. So let's just saddle in and start chatting. The first question is, what is your favorite book by an Indigenous author? And I struggle so much with what is your favorite type questions because it is so difficult for me to pick just one. So in Alicia fashion, I picked 3. Why not? Why not? So the first book that I would like to mention today is The Only Good Indians by Stephen Graham Jones. This was a 2020 release and has been flying around BookTube, flying around the world. It was so hyped for me when I read it. However, not only did this book live up to the hype, but it just like blew it out of the water. This book blew me away. I will be thinking about this book probably for the rest of my life. It was just one of the most incredible and visceral reading experiences I have ever had. I don't even have my physical copy with me because I've already lent it out to someone to read it. I'm just like, read this book. It is so good. So in The Only Good Indians, we are following 4 Blackfeet men who have been friends since childhood, and 10 years ago, they went on an elk hunting trip where something terrible happened. This was like a fateful day. And then 10 years later, they are now being haunted by the events of the day. This is a literary horror story. It is also a slasher. It is also a family and community drama. It is one of the most incredibly written and like experiential novels I have ever read. Absolutely loved it. Can't recommend it enough. I am definitely a fan of this book. Next, we've got Moon of the Crusted Snow by Waubgeshig Rice. I read this book last year and I think reading this post or like during a pandemic would be so much more intense. So in Moon of the Crusted Snow, we are following a northern Indigenous community where they have been self-sufficient for generations, and all of a sudden in the southern province, so I believe this is set in northern Canada and probably in Ontario somewhere, the world just starts going dark. Power stops working and like mass panic ensues. But this community is fine. They're totally self-sufficient. They're living their lives, doing what they've always done, until people from the south start descending on this community, and then it just gets very grim and bleak. This is a apocalyptic tale, but also has a lot of lore weaved within it. The like Wendigo lore is weaved into these pages. This was very ominous. It was very slow. It was very creeping, but it was like very haunting when I read it last year. So reading it this year now, I feel like we just have a really sharp edge. I love this, and you should read it. My third favorite book by an Indigenous author, it's got to be Jonny Appleseed by Joshua Whitehead. This is a contemporary coming-of-age story about a two-spirit queer Indigenous youth, and it's basically almost like a vignette style narrative where each chapter kind of jumps to a different place in a different time. It's totally non-linear, all sharing fragments of Jonny Appleseed's life. And it's kind of painting this portrait of Jonny Appleseed that is filled in like paint by number style each chapter. You jump from the past to the present to like dreams. It's all very stream of consciousness. It's kind of described as a fever dream on the back, but it's very easy. It's still very easy to follow because it's all about this one person and their life. It's a queer story. It's a coming of age story. It's a story of community and an Indigenous youth moving away from the reservation and what that means both with family and then with community. This was incredible and I absolutely loved this, and I was emotional the whole time I was reading it, and then after it I'm just kind of like, whoa. Definitely love it. Definitely you should read it. Jonny Appleseed is where it's at. Question 2. What book by an Indigenous author do you find yourself recommending most often? Again, I've got 2. I've got 1 nonfiction and 1 fiction. For the nonfiction book, I've got A Mind Spread Out on the Ground by Alicia Elliott. A Mind Spread Out on the Ground is part memoir, part essay collection from Tuscarora writer Alicia Elliott. And this is just one of the most powerful collections I've ever read. There are so many points of conversation in this. Alicia Elliott covers topics from parenthood to racism to sexual assault to mental illness to intergenerational trauma, even gentrification. She kind of picks up all of these like huge topics and huge points of conversation, but focuses on them from a very personal point of view. And she weaves her own life and her own experience into these topics. I found this novel to be so educational and so accessible, much more accessible than I feel it even needed to be. Yeah, this just seems like required reading to me, and I cannot recommend this enough. And another book you will have seen me recommend before in the past is Taaqtumi, an anthology of Arctic horror stories. So Taaqtumi is an Inuktitut word meaning in the dark, and this is a collection of horror short stories from a range of Inuk authors about living in the Arctic, both in terms of landscape and community, and then all of the kind of challenges that are faced living in the Arctic, whether that is nature and environment or colonialism. This is just like such a wide range of short stories covering a wide range of themes, and there is just like something for everyone here. There's one where there is a mother and child trying to survive a polar bear. There is one that explores a zombie apocalypse in an Arctic community. I absolutely loved this horror short story collection, and if you are a fan of horror, if you are a fan of short story collections, I recommend Taaqtumi. Question 3. What is a book that you picked up on someone else's recommendation? One that I read recently was Winter Counts by David Heska Wanbli Weiden. This was a 2020 release. I heard about this on Bookstagram. Lots of content creators were talking about this on Bookstagram, but I think I originally heard about it from a review from Aaron's Library. And Winter Counts is a thriller crime novel set in a Lakota community in South Dakota, where we are following a vigilante for hire and his kind of day-to-day. We learn a lot about his life. He is an extremely compelling character. And we are following him when his nephew gets wrapped up in some sort of crime. And so he needs to try and figure out how to save his nephew when the law is not on his side. When the law is not on the side of his Indigenous community at all. This was incredible. If you are a fan of the thriller crime genre, this one is not to be missed. Question 4, what is the most recent book that you have read by an Indigenous author? So I was reading 2 books at once and I kind of finished them within the same day of each other, and I was reading these for IndigAthon. So the first one is Alatswe by Darcy Little Badger. This is another 2020 release, and this is a YA fantastical novel. I don't even want to quite call it a fantasy because this is very much set in modern day. This is set in America, and in America that you would absolutely recognize, but it is also shaped by magic and monsters, which was just so exciting. And we are following an 18-year-old named Alatswe, and she has a special ability that has been passed down to her from generation to be able to communicate with the ghosts of dead animals. And she's got a BFF named Kirby, who is her pet, who she had known for 12 years alive and now for 5 years dead. And ghosts, ghost dogs, just please, please. I can't. I love it. I love it so much. And we are following Alatswe as she takes it upon herself to investigate the murder of her cousin, where everybody else has deemed his death an accident, but she knows that he was murdered. So this is incredible. I'll talk about this more in my November wrap up, but just know that I gave this 5 stars, and I 100% want everyone to read this. Ghost dogs! And also finished around the same time is Annie Muktuk and Other Stories by Norma Dunning. Norma Dunning is an Inuit writer, and this was a collection of contemporary short stories, all surrounding Inuk culture and kind of challenging perceptions. These stories were lyrical and beautiful and bold and sometimes really angry and sometimes really sad, and I just absolutely loved this. I loved her writing style. I loved the kind of story she brought you into. She kind of starts this collection off so aggressively, and I was so here for that. And yeah, this was an incredible experience. And if you like short stories, if you like contemporary short stories, if you like short stories that are almost bordering on poetry, I highly recommend. I believe I heard about this collection from Thunderbird Woman Reads, and I really thank her for that. Question 5, what is the next book by an Indigenous author that you plan on reading? So next up on my IndigAthon list is Mongrels by Stephen Graham Jones. This is a horror story, a family story about a family of werewolves. So get me on that. I am here for Stephen Graham Jones. I am here to stay. I want to make my way through his entire backlist, and Mongrels just sounds incredible. And finally, question 6. Are there any 2020 releases by Indigenous authors that you want to get to soon? And the answer is yes, definitely. First on my list is Night of the Mannequins by Stephen Graham Jones. This was released in September, and I feel like for me, I kind of missed my radar because of The Only Good Indians. Like, that was everywhere, and this one just kind of slipped under the radar for me, but I have heard that it is incredible. This is a novella that promises to be an incredible teen slasher. We are following a bunch of teens that I believe go to do some grand, amazing prank, and then it goes horribly wrong and turns into a slasher fest. And I trust Stephen Graham Jones to deliver the goods. So Night of the Mannequins is very high on my radar. Also, Love After the End, an anthology of Two-Spirit and indigiqueer speculative fiction. This is an anthology that was edited by Joshua Whitehead, but is filled with stories by queer Indigenous authors. Speculative fiction is a genre that I love, and I feel like that intersection just sounds incredible to me. And we all know I love short stories, so this was a match made in heaven, and I cannot wait to read this one. This one is on my IndigAthon TBR. And then a last honorable mention that I just want to mention for this one is Bone Black by Carol Rose GoldenEagle. This was released in very late 2019, so it's within the last year that this was released, and this is a fiction story that explores and discusses missing and murdered Indigenous women. So this seems like this is going to be one that is very heavy and dark and filled with trauma, but I feel like is a conversation that needs to be had, and I am very curious to see where this one goes. So there you have it, pals. There is a list of recommendations of incredible books by Indigenous authors. Let me know if you have read any of these books and what you thought. Let me know if you want to read any of these and we can chat about them. I just wanted to give a little shout out of thanks to Brody and Michelle for putting together this read-a-thon. Take care out there, pals. Stay well, stay safe, stay spooky, and until next time, I'll see you. Bye!